kill the brain, and you kill the ghoul.
Hello, Boils and Ghouls, and welcome to the Cold Dead Hard Horror Break, where we recap and review what we've watched, read, and collected over the past week. Occasionally, in our horror breaks, we will visit a special topic, and that's what we would like to do today by dedicating this episode to the amazing horror legacy of George A. Romero, who was born on February 4th, 1940. I'm your host, Gigi, and joining me today are Kin of the Dead.
Hey guys.
And C from Wither.
Hey there.
Thank you for tuning in, and let's get scary. So to get started, we'd like to discuss the 1968 Night of the Living Dead, notably the most important and beloved zombie film of all time. Romero effectively started the zombie craze that would last decades and inspire millions. Alright, C, tell us about the first time you watched it.
Alright, so this is kind of a similar story to a lot of my very first introduction to George Romero. So I had a really good buddy of mine. I think I was about 8 years old, so it would have been 1996, 97, right in that time frame. And we were really into werewolves at the time for whatever reason, so we were staying up super late, and his mom was asleep, telling us to go to bed, and we snuck back out like 2 or 3 in the morning, turned on, I think it was satellite dish at the time, and just happened to pop on Night of the Living Dead, the original, so it was in black and white. And we weren't able to actually start it at the beginning because you couldn't rewind back then. But we started it, and it when you get into them trying to like bust through the doors and stuff like that, it was just a really new experience because I had never seen anything like that before, and I was young and impressionable enough to where it just kind of set the tone for for my entire life following that. So it was pretty good. I was super young. I probably shouldn't have been watching it, but I'm glad nobody came out and stopped us from being able to finish it. So yeah,
love that. Horror friend stories like started at like sleepovers and stuff, right? It was like a thing like growing up. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was one of those ones where like, it was like a double wide, I think, at the time. So, all the walls were tin, basically paper thin. And the neighbors had a big pasture out back where they had horses and cows. And I remember very distinctly watching the movie. They're all inside. Everything's boarded up. The kind of onslaught hadn't quite started yet. And one of the horses out back made an ungodly noise, scared the crap out of us, which I think just kind of added fuel to that fire as well.
Wow. It's the imagination, right? When you're young, watching horror at too young an age, right? Your imagination is so much worse than anything you're going to see on TV.
Well, no, absolutely. And I mean, like, yeah, the idea that, like, you don't know what this is, so, is this actually possible?
Right.
But yeah, it was a pretty good, I think, experience getting into it all. But
that's cool. Love that.
Well, thanks, C. So what about you, Ken? How did you first get into zombies and watching Night of the Living Dead?
So Night of the Living Dead was definitely the first zombie movie I ever watched. I've mentioned before in conversations at a super young age, I developed an affinity for the Universal monsters. So like I was like 6 years old, and black and white movies were kind of like a thing for me, right? Like I loved monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And like as a kid, those stories aren't like super easy to follow, but it's like you're watching for the monsters as a kid, right? You're just waiting, like you'll sit an hour staring at the TV waiting for like one of these monsters that you're obsessed with to pop up. But like black and white movies when I was super young were like I was used to them. I would like hope to see some kind of crazy alien or monster or something. And kind of like I was at a friend's place. We had this thing here growing up that like 8 o'clock this an action, like a family action movie would start on the same channel every night. and then that would wrap up, and there would be like an hour of news, and then 11 o'clock they would play like a horror movie, and then at like 1 a.m. they would play like a old horror or sci-fi, classic, right? And that was every Friday, Saturday they would do that. So I was at a friend's place, and we had watched whatever action movie that was on, and then went and messed around while the news was on, and it was kind of like that bedtime where like talked to his mom into letting us watch the next movie, and throughout that everyone had gone to bed, and we were still up watching movies. No one was watching us, and then the classic movie that came on was Night of the Living Dead. And in my mind, like, instantly, I related that to the movies from, like, the 30s, 40s, 50s monster movies. It was just that black and white and that intro. I was sold right away, but I had, like, no concept of what a zombie was. And I sat through that whole thing with my jaw wide open, like, these aren't the monsters I was, like, waiting for, right? But, like, by the end of it, I was so hooked. And, zombies just, like, in that one instance became, like, part of my subculture.
Right, they infected you.
It totally infected, 100%.
So
nice. That was a good one, G.
My question then would be, when you were watching it for the first time, when you were, absorbing kind of what you were seeing on screen, because, it was probably late 80s, early 90s, I would say.
Late 80s.
Were you already associating it with what you knew as like what a zombie was versus...
No, man. Honestly, that was my introduction to it. Because it's not like now with like streaming stuff, right? Like, it was always super selective what you could get. So if you had like an interest already in something, it was easy because knew what to look for, what to ask for, right? So my thing at that age, anyways, was monsters, right? Like anything with vampires, werewolves, aliens. You know what I mean? That was kind of what my brain associated with, like horror, scary movies. Even like slashers and stuff, right? But like an actual, like, proper Romero zombie, like the zombie we all know, that was my very first encounter with one. But it was like this very easy transition for me because it's an older movie, it's a black and white movie, right? But black and white movies were no different than anything else to me at the time. Just give me a couple of monsters and I'm good, right? And zombies became like part of that echelon with werewolves and vampires.
Right on.
Yeah.
Nice.
What about you, G?
Oh, thanks, Ken. So, my first introduction to zombies in general was actually not Night of the Living Dead, but Dawn of the Dead. When I was a little girl, I snuck down to the TV and, like I often did, and turned on horror movies, and Dawn of the Dead was playing. It scared the crap out of me. I was looking around going, we've got too many windows. And it wasn't for another several years that I got to see Night of the Living Dead that I adored for so many reasons. I mean, one, the zombies were scary. Two, the way he revealed the whole story, like the kid in the basement and the parents. And then you have the ending where he gets shot in the head. You're like, oh, he's home free. He survived. People are coming. He's made it. And then boom. It's like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah. I think that was probably the first time I was ever, like, genuinely upset at a film that I was watching. Was the very tail end of that.
It was like that concept, that like twist ending where there's no happy ending, I think was probably pretty rare, right? Like it wasn't a tool at the time used in storytelling, right? Like stories had a formula, and it there was kind of this happy ending for most things anyways, especially when you're young. You're only exposed to so much, so I could see that jarring. You want to hear something funny? That realization that that at the end, that no happy ending, that, and this is a little bit sociopathic of me to say, that didn't really dawn on me as like a thing until years later. Like, again, when I was young and watching movies, I was literally just until there was monsters on screen. You watch that action, right? And then you're just kind of waiting. So, like, it's not like it was new to me. And I watch that movie a few times a year. I really think that Night is a perfect movie from beginning to end. When you, like, kind of balance out what budget and stuff they were working with, like, but story-wise, I think it was perfect.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting because of the bad endings out there, that's one of the things about Night of the Living Dead is that, that is a bad ending. He does get shot in the head and he's been the protagonist the whole time. But also humanity survived. Like, humanity is surviving the zombie apocalypse.
Right.
And that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
The world moves on. Your main cast is wiped out, but at least like the world is moving on, right?
Yeah. Well, and then we have survivors then into Dawn.
Right.
So, which, I mean, is still in my top 10 favorite movies of all time.
Oh, for sure. No, I was just saying, so, I have the opposite story. Like, you watched Dawn really young. I was probably in my late teens before I watched Dawn. In fact, I'm pretty sure I watched Day first.
Really?
Because like a lot of the stuff was out of continuity. It wasn't like streaming services, right? And they're just movies. It's not like Night of the Living Dead Part 2 or 3. And I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really have a lot of people, especially like outside of the young kid age, that were into horror or followed horror. Like, most of my horror knowledge came from like friends' older brothers, or talking to people at the movie store or whatever. But like, that information without an internet or whatever, right, wasn't available. So like, I didn't know that there were more movies. I didn't know Day of the Dead was attached to Night of the Living Dead, and it all just kind of pieced together, in my late teens. But Dawn of the Dead, I remember watching, and like, I think the first time I watched it, because there's this silly aspect to it, right, of like trying to balance out what is the meaning behind this movie, right? Because there's some parts that are pretty comical, and then there are other parts that are like terrifying, and I think why it's such an important movie in my mind is because it's super complex, right? And there's definitely a meaning about consumerism, in like George loved to do that, right? It's one of the things I love about him. But it is a complex movie, and I think on the surface it could be taken as like a little bit silly, or making fun of itself, but it's complex, and I think that's why it's withstood the test of time and been an important movie to a lot of people.
One of the things I especially love about Dawn, and someone could correct me if this, information is wrong, but I heard that the actress in the beginning, when the helicopter's rotating and the zombies are coming toward her, his initial instruction to her was to like fall back scared, kind of like you would expect a woman to do, especially in that time period of just like oh no, yeah, zombies are coming. But her feedback was that she wanted to like stand up and fight and be braver. And what I love about Romero is that, at least in the story, and you can kind of see in his work, is he said yes. He was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And his willingness to listen to like other people's inputs and allow a female character in a movie, in the 70s to have like agency. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, and like, he's known as like a pretty progressive guy, right? Like, especially in film. And I don't know that there's been anyone that's worked with him that, like, you hear stories, right? Like, especially in quote unquote Hollywood, but he seemed to kind of sit outside that in this, like, and even at the height of his popularity, still kind of sit with that indie creator mentality. Yeah, which I think is one of those things that just draws people to him as a creator, as a filmmaker, right? Is that, he's a person with a vision. He's not Hollywood, right? He's not Hollywood. And even though, like, he had a popularity that could have been that, he chose intentionally to kind of stick into this little indie, like, what movies were to him is what he wanted to make, which I really love.
Oh my gosh, me too, yeah.
What are our thoughts on Day of the Dead?
You know,
it's always funny when you get to this part in the conversation of the Dead franchise, right? Because everyone's got some feelings about that.
Well, so Romero he set me up for failure as a zombie enthusiast. Right, so you watch Night of the Living Dead as a super young kid, you kind of get polarized by it, and all of a sudden it's like this great genre that's, new and groundbreaking for, in the horror realm.
Right.
And he follows it up with Dawn of the Dead, which was absolutely killer. Just a great film all around. And then I watched Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead. And Day of the Dead had some of, like, his special effects and the way he was doing, gore and kind of death scenes, and Dawn of the Dead was, next level. But I think he perfected it in Day of the Dead. But I'll tell you what, my zombies are Dawn of the Dead zombies.
Right.
Those things are the ones that drew, like, they were like the foundation for my epitome of what a zombie was.
Right.
And, it goes into, as we discuss the rest of the films or whatever films we get to, his evolution is one of the things that it took me years and years to kind of come back and respect.
Right.
So you're talking about, like, Bub in it. Bub was, like, your problem. Your problem was with Bub. Yeah.
100%. And so, and even then, like, even in my angst of zombie stuff, I even went back to the original Night of the Living Dead, and the original ghoul picks up the rock. He's using tools, right?
Yep.
And I got a sour taste in my mouth for a little, for a couple years there. I'm still a huge fan of the franchise, don't get me wrong. But I was like, man, what happened in, Dawn of the Dead versus the other two? And then, you do see it kind of evolve, but I was a huge fan of, especially now, much more than I was back in the day, of Day of the Dead. I don't think any of the remakes do it any justice.
No.
It's kind of like the one scapegoat out of all of them, or not scapegoat, black sheep out of all of them as far as, the remakes go. But yeah, the premise of it was great, right? He went from, a small community, regular civilians at night. He gets into, a little bit of mixture with some, not military, but like police style with some civilians in Dawn. And then he goes, almost straight military and scientist in Day. So I thought his evolution was great, but yeah, it took me a long time to swallow that one.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have that problem too, though. Yeah. I mean, for me, I kind of, I enjoy it, but I know I'm one of the outliers because I think it's kind of an interesting idea that what human parts would be left.
Right.
And what sort of hell is that, too? If you were self-aware.
That's assuming that you're self-aware in your previous conscious body, the way I always kind of envision it. And I'll say I'm right in between the two of you guys as far as my feelings on it, because I remember being like a teenager and watching it and absolutely loving it. And like that, like, kid part of the brain that's only looking for monsters and special effects and stuff, it's still alive and well in me even to this day. But the gore in that movie, the effects, the zombie effects, I think are still amazing, right? Like that. So the concept was established back at night, right? and that like evolution of, now we went from like a rural area to a city populated area, so that concept is explored. And that's huge, right? Like, I don't know if we touched on it, but like zombies as we know it started in Night of the Living Dead. Before Night of the Living Dead, zombies were like a voodoo curse. That's all they meant in pop culture. There was no flesh-eating zombie, right? So we've got these huge groundbreaking ideas, and then we have these like amazing groundbreaking effects in Day. So like super young, I loved it because like seeing that dude in the hallway get torn apart, like, oh hell, right? Like one of the best things ever put out in cinema. Still to this day, I love it. And then, I got a little bit older and more refined into like actual movies, and now my brain is turning into an adult and paying attention to story and dialogue and all these things I never cared about when I was young. And now I'm picking it apart, and it sits at the low end of the franchise for me. Now, I look at the franchise as a whole and that evolution, right? And I think the whole Dead series or franchise could be summed up with the word evolution. I look at it as a whole, and it's all a message, and there's ebbs and flows, right? Ups and downs, but like I have a new appreciation for it now. That's neither why I didn't like it or why I loved it. It's just where it sits in as far as the message and the evolution of the franchise itself. I get it now, and I think the way that when George was making that movie, he wanted people to see, and I'm kind of, that's where I'm sitting with it now. As part of the franchise, I like it's not the movie you're going to recommend if you're going to recommend one of the Dead movies to someone, right? But like, I can't do a marathon of them and skip it. It has its place.
So bringing us around to like more modern Romero movies, what about like Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival?
So, did any of you guys see Land when it came out in the theaters?
I did. I was in theaters opening day.
Yeah. Okay. Same. So I have a buddy of mine who's like one of my best friends now, but he was like growing up, he was my friend's older brother, and he was one of those people, like you don't really have a lot of people into the same stuff as us, growing up, right? But he was like one of those people. That's like one of the things we bonded on: 80s punk music and horror movies. So, so a lot of my like George A. Romero knowledge actually comes from this dude. And so we were just like friends at this point when Land had came out, and we were hanging out, and it was like a huge deal at the time. And I remember us like nerding out that this movie was coming out, and we were there opening day too. First impressions, G, when you first saw it?
So I loved it. John Leguizamo, his performance was so fun to me, and also Asia Argento, Dario Argento's daughter, was in it. She was so cool. So I thought the use of like fireworks and seeing them evolve further was such a neat idea, but I was also one of those people that enjoyed Bub, and so I kind of went in not knowing that they would be like a smart zombie, but kind of appreciating Romero's like sensibilities, I guess you could say. And I know one of people's biggest complaints was that like you have these like semi-intelligent zombies, but I enjoyed it. So what about you?
So I was thrilled in the theater, right, watching it, and a lot of that was excitement, and there was a ton of action in it too, right? So it was a fantastic experience, right? And then something like when me and buddies go do a movie, we will have a beer afterwards and just like talk out the movie, right? So it was in that phase afterwards that I kind of felt like something was lost. And there was a big gap there, right? But there was something, and I couldn't put my finger on it, that was just one of these things are not like the other kind of, it just didn't fit. mentally for me, and that was on a little bit of reflection. I wasn't completely thrown off by the organization behind the zombies, but like I did, question that belief. But again, like everything, years later on reflection and watching them as a whole, I'm like pretty happy with it now, like as part of the franchise. Like again, it'll sit in the third, fourth spot for me, but it's kind of that peak of the evolution, and looking at it, standing back and looking at the franchise as a whole, it kind of, you could feel that that's the direction that you want it to go, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny too, because the more I think about it, and like Steve, the smart zombie thing, I had problems with, but when we say, we're kind of living hell, would that be being in the zombie body? I tend to think that what his message was no, you're dead, right? You've died. Now there's something, like your body has now created something new, right? Or the virus has created something new, and it's like a new entity. And it's those entities that are evolving, whether it's, the viral strain or whatever, and they're becoming more intelligent. And it's almost seems like, a horror modeling of, like apes kind of evolving into man, right? And, it's a slow, drawn out process, but in going back to the original Ghoul and Night of the Living Dead, when you see that, anger, and he grabs the rock and he's smashing and everything's just kind of going on instinct, you can kind of picture like an angry chimp that just grabs a rock and goes after something, right? Mm-hmm. And then, making your way through the movies and into Land, seeing the zombies as that, primitive, early caveman style, where they're, pre-language, but, kind of using hand signals to organize. I don't know, like, the more I think about it and the older I get, the cooler I find that concept. And, like, let's be honest, Romero's the zombie genre that he created, it's bigger than Romero now, right? So We've got 28 Days Later, and we've got, The Walking Dead, and we have what we thought was Romero's vision, what we, kind of have as zombies in our head. We have it in multiple places, right? Well, even where we were wrong, it just wasn't that what we thought, was the vision, wasn't his vision. His vision was this evolution of dead, right? The evolution of the living dead. But we have those other aspects, and, for his vision, I like it the more I think about it. The older I get, the more I appreciate that's Romero's vision, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the neat things, like, even in horror fan, like, shorthand, if we're trying to describe a type of zombie in a work of fiction, we even say Romero-style zombies, right?
Yeah.
And everybody knows what you're talking about.
Right. So now here's the good question, because you're absolutely right, and I hear that pop up in basically every zombie conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So when we picture, like, when someone says that to you, well, what is the zombie that you picture? Because, like, even after that big spiel I went on, when someone says Romero zombie, in my mind, it's the slow, like, kind of creeping, right? Flesh eater. I don't picture Big Dad here above, right? Like, when someone says Romero zombie in conversation, in horror conversations, that's what it means, right? It's that slow. It's not the 28 Days Later zombie or whatever, right? If
it's a Romero zombie, it's dumb, shambling, flesh eating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's one of the reasons.
Point on Land?
No. Okay. So, Land.
Did we give you enough time to come to grips with your thoughts?
So, Land is a little bit easier. I was a little bit older. I had kind of come to terms with Bub. So when Big Daddy got introduced, all the way up until the very end of that film, I could appreciate, watching the evolution that he was creating with them for sure. There was some parts like towards the end where it seemed like it didn't flow with his own evolution, right? You go from a rock in one to kind of understanding and like having, making a face when you're listening to something familiar and like, pointing out objects. And then you go from like being able to actively convince hordes of other unintelligent, mindless creatures, while carrying an M16. So the tail end of it is kind of what got me with that one. But overall, I do think the film is an absolute worthy addition to the franchise. I think, like you were saying earlier, where like something kind of stuck out that just made it feel different. I, in my opinion, I attribute that to their funding, right? Their ability to create better special effects, their ability to hire well-known actors at the time. Right. If you look at Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, I mean, outside of one or two now, like back then, right, there's not a whole lot of, I mean, I would say, not to say they're not well known, right, but
no, but especially when the movies were being filmed, you're absolutely right.
And I think, like, if you were to put 6 TVs up and you press play on all of his films at the same time, just visually, you're gonna notice the most distinct difference with Land of the Dead. Even when you look at Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead, which were made later, just like the production value, because they had so much revenue behind it to support it, it just doesn't look the same.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they did a really... What's up?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, so, and I think they... because he's all about like that social commentary. You were talking about how he was really progressive for his time, that type of thing. And I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about this film is, like when you have Night of the Living Dead, you're talking about, survival. There's a little bit of, there was some racism style undertones that he was trying to capture. For sure. Some Cold War era, like distrust that he was trying to go for. Dawn of the Dead, you got the consumerism and like the familiarity type piece that they actually mention in the 2004 remake, Dawn of the Dead. They talk about how they come back because it's a familiar place, kind of paying homage. And when you get into Land of the Dead, the theme that I got mostly out of this was like the division of classism, I guess is the way they would call it nowadays, right? So we have very wealthy who, eating caviar and have all these slaves, and then you have the poor who are just, struggling to make ends meet. And I think he did a really, really good job capturing that in this film. Much more 100%. Than, the other ones obviously had different themes, but I think he did a really, really good job.
Right? Each one is kind of capturing its own moment in time and commentary on society, right? Like, Big Daddy was basically the zombie Spartacus, right? Like,
yeah, that's funny. Yeah. And the Starflowers was a fantastic addition.
Yeah.
It was so far outside the box of my thinking at the time that it was like it's so simple, but like brilliant, I guess, at the same time. I really appreciated that about it.
Well, I mean, and they even incorporate, as much as that movie's kind of panned, when I look at things like the game State of Decay, I feel like, I don't know this, but when I saw them use fireworks and stuff as a zombie distraction, I was like Romero.
It's got to be such a strong influence in anything, like any passion project regarding zombies. Like, there's going to be a lot. If there's no Romero influence in it, then we don't have real fans behind it, right?
Right. Exactly. So of these more modern movies, just talking further into that, Diary of the Dead is probably my favorite of like the newer 3.
Hands down.
That's the opinion I hear most of the time, for sure.
I mean, and part of me wonders if it's because it is the like Romero zombie most of the time in Diary.
Right. Sorry, go.
Oh no, I mean, and the characters are new and fresh, and the story still felt fresh, but it also felt really authentic. And he used such a great style. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a break, right? And I remember people saying that, and see, I know you're a big fan of this one too. I remember people saying that, like, it feels like it's outside of the franchise, and that was one of the big complaints that I was hearing from people when that movie first came out, was like, it feels not like a reboot, but just outside of the franchise. And I still think it kind of sits on that fringe, but the style of it, and like kind of going back to that original Night of the Living Dead kind of zombie, and that's almost kind of what it was, just captured in modern time, right? It's definitely one of my modern favorites.
Well, I mean, and the only way I think it really fits in is because of who he is and his vision, but also the guardsman military group that you see towards the end is the same group that is featured in Survival of the Dead.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
So, I mean, he does kind of keep things tied together, but the style is so different. I think that's what's kind of drawing for people. So you have the budget of Land of the Dead making it stand apart, and then you have the style in Diary, which I appreciate, but it also makes it stand apart, and then you have Survival. I don't know. Survival is probably my least favorite of all of his, though. If I'm going to put on a marathon and I'm getting short on time, I'll skip it. Yeah.
Right. I get that. And I can't argue that. I'd probably be the same way. I do feel though that it's earned its place in the Romero family of movies. It's better than. It sounds terrible to say it's better than a throwaway. It's not what I mean. It's definitely a good movie. It's definitely not a throwaway. But
well, that's the thing. It's you're picking out of jewels, right? When you're talking about Romero zombies movies, it's I'm picking, my least favorite, but it's still a really great movie.
I love them all. It just happens to be at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
See, I feel like, and again, Diary was a movie that, I liked right away. I definitely liked it more than most people I had talked to. But I feel like after talking to you about it, I actually appreciated it a little bit more. Because, you've had some pretty heavy thoughts on this one.
Yeah, just the start of this movie has my absolute favorite zombie kill scene in the history of zombie media. But it's they break into a hospital. They're looking for some medications and some survivors and stuff. And one of the zombies that's laying down on the table wakes up, and they just use the paddles for defibrillation. Right. And they put it on both sides of its head, and it's eyes pop out and start melting and stuff. It's probably the best part. But no, so yeah, this film. For me, this one rings right in the tippy top. I have a hard time keeping it out of my top 3 in the entire franchise.
Yeah.
Because I think what I enjoy about this one the most is almost the viewpoint, right? So he kind of adopted that found footage style, movie making. But I think what this one does a really, really good job of is applying a sense of urgency to everything that's happening, and it's it's a product of the found footage of it,
right?
And it's pretty he throws a couple Easter eggs to his original movies, primarily Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, that are in this one, that he references and stuff. And then like Gigi was saying, at the end of it, it leads into the follow-on movie, but I do agree the style in which it was filmed is definitely outside the box for the franchise, so it does make it, if you do watch them in chronological order, you do see some differences in it for sure. But yeah, this movie, it was super deep, I think. And I think the more times I watch it, the more kind of appreciation I gain for it, because you have, the starting premise, it's a documentary style film where they're able to incorporate a lot of his old way of filming with the new, right?
Like that guerrilla style filmmaking.
Yeah, those are the words I was looking for.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, and I find it, I hear people say the same thing, where Diary of the Dead is kind of like at the bottom of their list, and I don't get it, especially with, Tom Savini helping out with it, doing a lot of the special effects. I believe in this one.
I think that's it, right? I think that might be the catalyst to why a lot of people put it outside of the franchise, because it does kind of feel like an outcast in the franchise. But like, it's in Romero's world, and again, I agree with both of you guys. The style of it, and it was a little bit. Like, I knew what I was getting into, right? Because you hear about movies, even back then before they would come out. But like, I knew what I was into, but it kind of gave me that same feeling, not dissimilar to Land, of just not feeling right. But what you said, same thing as what you said earlier. It's different budgets, different technologies, right? It's all within that world. It's still classic Romero trying something new, right? Which I love, and kind of going back to boots on the ground, guerrilla indie filmmaking.
That's such a
with it's just another one that my appreciation has grown for. And again, I think the story is really good, and I think people's aversion to it is just because it is filmed so differently. It's hard for the brain to reconcile that they're all part of the same universe. But it doesn't. For me, it doesn't take away from the movie.
So, I got a question.
Okay.
Are you familiar with all 4 endings?
For Dire?
Diary of the Dead.
No.
Yeah.
So,
I can't say that I'm familiar with 4.
Yeah, so there's the theatrical ending. So, like, it was, I don't think where I was living at the time it was shown in theaters, but some of the larger cities it was in. And, that's the one where the main character, she's filming herself kind of at the end of the event. She's all, pissed off about how everything's not working out in her way. And, she suggests that in there, she kind of suggests that the zombies have, I wouldn't say she's kind of hinting at the evolution, but she's hinting at like their eventual takeover.
Right.
I can go through them all if you want, but
no, please do. So
the first alternate ending is, instead of having her kind of on camera, it shows her running through a field. She gets attacked by some zombies and she drops the camera, and that ends there.
So that one there for sure. I know I've seen that. Yeah, which was probably on the DVD, right?
Yeah, I believe that was on the DVD. And then, so there's 2 different versions of the DVD, and I can't remember which one of the second endings is on it, but then one of them, it ends completely different. And then it's got like a different special feature on the old school DVDs. So the second one, she escapes that farmhouse, and she's running I'm pretty sure it's the same field, but this time she escapes and she gets into a helicopter. She gets into that helicopter, and there's a zombie hiding on board.
Oh.
Yes. So, and then the third one, I think I kind of like the third one the best. So in the third alternate ending, or the fourth actual ending, she ends up surviving, her ending predicament where she's kind of trapped. She manages to find a safe haven, and she's given her all of her footage from the cameras to a news station, trying to expose the truth about what's going on and everything, because they have all of the different camera views, right? It's not just their handhelds.
No, because this was a thing that her boyfriend was doing throughout.
So it gets crazy. So she's trying to expose everybody or expose everything to everybody, and the news station ends up being controlled by the government, who suppresses the footage, covers up the truth, and it ends with her like in an interrogation room with the assumption that she's about to get offed.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, that's intense. I like that.
Yeah.
So that to me, that whole ending there screams classic Romero.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so yeah, and it was going to be one of the questions. I didn't want to sound like a dummy, but everyone's kind of got their own opinion. All the Romero movies have like a theme to them, a tone, a comment on society. What I was going to ask what everyone's takeaway was from Diary, but I think that kind of sums it up, right? Like this Orwellian kind of, beware of Big Brother kind of feel.
Right.
Yeah.
When you gotta
And
look
sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such a foreshadowing for like how we are now too, because
Right. Yeah.
that was such out of the box thinking to have everything so documented to be released in what was it, 07?
Yeah. For Diary,
Yeah. So I mean, that was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, there's always a meaning. You're not going to get through a Romero movie without some kind of, like deeper meaning behind it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I actually pieced that together before this conversation, because it's always been like a question on my mind that I ask people when we talk about it. Maybe, what do you think the message was there? And everyone's got like a different opinion. But.
So I read a bunch up on this one a while back, and he gave a real short interview about it, kind of like what he was going for. And he was talking about like the manipulation of the media, which is, present day problem.
Right.
The not increase, but the advancement of technology, and then the idea of discovering the truth.
Right.
Like that kind of ties into that fourth alternate ending that he. I don't think I've seen like as the actual ending on anything. It's only in special features, but
it's just a special feature.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, that's
so
cool.
What is everyone's thought of Survival of the Dead?
I think by survival, I'm going to give Steve a moment to breathe because I heard that sigh. I think survival, by that point, I was so desensitized to expectations from a movie. And now survival I never saw in the theater. But I did see it really early when it was available. Actually, I think I went straight to buy it as soon as it was available. I remember opening it up on like release day when it was available to buy a DVD. But like I was excited to add it to the collection, but it's not that I wasn't excited to watch the new Romero movie, because I had read a bit about it when they were in production, and I was always excited for a Romero flick. But I didn't have any preconceived notions going into it of what I want out of it. It was more of, let's see what Romero has offered up this time, right? And I say that in a gleeful, excited way. I wasn't expecting anything. It was just, let's see what we got. I'm excited to absorb it. And I think the first time, like, I loved it watching through. I think when it was over, I was kind of like, okay. And like just happy it was in the collection, but you're not calling people to tell them you got to watch this movie right now.
Yeah.
And kind of like the last couple, it's over time it's kind of gone up and down, and I sit where I sit with all of the last three now. I'm happy it's part of the franchise. It's again, if I run out of time in a marathon, I'm gonna skip it, but I might pick it up the next day and throw it in just to complete it off, because it's still worthy in my mind. It's a worthy George A. Romero movie, and I enjoy it more every time I watch it. All right, C, let us have it.
So I do really enjoy this film. We'll preface this before. I think my biggest gripe with it was the like Hatfield and McCoy like aspect they went down. It was just like a cycle of violence, right? Because it was, they're on this deserted island. It's, primarily two families, and they're feuding over, how to deal with the outbreak that they're. And I think for like the first couple times I watched it just felt limited in its ability to do anything outside of that, right?
Yeah, why go small?
Yeah,
we are going bigger and bigger. Why go small?
Yeah, and I mean, the more I watch it, the more I do appreciate it for sure. Some of I'm not an actor, right? But I think in that regard, this is definitely falls at the bottom of the list as just far as, maybe it's, the script, like the dialogue part of it. Because the story I thought was really, really well done. I just think that the way it was executed left some things to be desired. But he kind of brought back the evolution of the zombies again, right? So like he had them evolving kind of as the time goes on, which I thought was really cool to kind of bring back, because you didn't really see it too much in, you didn't see it barely at all in Dawn of the Dead. You didn't see it at all in Diary of the Dead, really. And he kind of came back to that core that he was trying to evolve in those first three. But I don't know, like the cycle of violence, what would you call it, like tribalism, I guess.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense. It just, I think that's kind of what threw me off originally from it. But
right.
But yeah, other than that, I mean, I really do enjoy the movie. It's just like you were saying, if you are watching a marathon and you are running out of time, you got to kind of pick and choose where you go. Unfortunately, this one is definitely number one, probably to be cut from that list.
Take it out.
Yeah.
But like, it's still like I agree. It's still one I enjoy. Hey guys, before we start wrapping up, Romero did a bunch of movies outside of the zombie franchise. I know it's kind of the wheelhouse we gravitate to in a Romero conversation, rightfully so. But what's everyone's favorite non-zombie or non-dead franchise Romero movie?
So for me, I instantly, without hesitation, go with The Crazies.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just so good, and I don't know. I feel like he did a fantastic job on that one.
It feels so Romero, right? Like, and so it's definitely one of mine, if not my number one non-zombie or non-dead Romero movie. But it is so Romero, right? Like I almost kind of feel like it's Dawn of the Dead, but like with a twist or like in a different area. Like there's just something about it that feels so familiar and perfect about that movie.
Well, I almost want to change my answer, because then there's Creepshow.
So, you know what's funny is we should rehearse this, because Crazies was mine, and as soon as you said it mentally, I was like, okay, I'll say Creepshow.
Okay, all right, yeah, let's do it again. Plus, the dog is barking again, so.
Right. Oh, I thought that was so funny to just keep that conversation going.
So, Creepshow.
Yep, totally. Yeah.
And
a classic. Yeah. Classic. And you know what's funny is that, so exactly the opposite of what I was just saying about the Crazies is like Creepshow. It was almost like a surprise to me when I realized, because you watch these things when you're young, you don't pay attention to who's behind them. They're just movies and characters to you, right?
Right.
But I was almost like surprised when I learned that, Creepshow was a Romero film, right? And like, that's bonkers cool. But it's like so outside of that feel of Romero to me, but still so good and so classic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, since you guys took all mine, I'm gonna I'm trying to pick between Night
I'm so
Riders.
curious if you're going to pick my number 3.
Night Riders or Monkey Shines, I think.
Yeah, so Monkey Shines.
I'll probably go with Night Riders. I thought like set in like the modern day Renaissance fair style where they've follow these guys who are reenacting jousting tournaments while riding motorcycles. I haven't seen that movie in probably 15 years, 20 years now. I'm going to have to rewatch it now. But that was definitely one of, if you went non-zombie and you got rid of the crazies and you got rid of Creepshow, and I'll give you Monkey Shines as your, I go with Night Riders for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Good
Not to be confused with the TV show.
Right.
But
I was trying to pull out a little Knight Rider line there and I couldn't think of one. I know they exist, it's just not fresh in my brain.
Yeah. And then I'm still waiting on. I think I mentioned it in a previous episode for this, but George Romero's Elegy.
Right.
I'm still waiting for that. Other than kind of what they have on their website, super short 21-minute film that was shot back in Pennsylvania in like the 60s, with no sound. They just add music and kind of a poem to it. And I'm really interested to see that and what comes out of it. But it's
for sure.
Non-zombie as well.
I cannot wait. I think it's going to be fantastic.
And like I haven't heard any updates, but I know that's still like a passion project that people are working on. It's probably just a slow go, right? Like I don't think there's any money behind it. It's more just people being passionate and putting time and effort into it, right? Yeah, so this was actually their project that Z and I donated to. Right. When we got the that is their funding though, right? Like crowdfunding. That's how they're yeah. And I reached out to them actually probably 2 or 3 months ago, and they said that the funding was secured for it. Now I think they're waiting on the rights to the music. Was the last that I heard, but it's been a while. Right on. But yeah, other than that, I mean, we could talk all day.
Well, thank you so much for all of your input and all of this information, guys. I really appreciate it, and thank you, fellow horror heads, for listening into this week. We plan to drop a new episode every Friday, and don't forget to catch up with our monthly horror news podcast called Dead Heart Horror Show. Keep it spooky, ghouls.